Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
It's time for the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games at Southern Utah University in Cedar City. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of a Utah sports tradition at utahsummergames.org. Participate in over 50 sports around the state. Then plan to join the opening ceremonies Friday, June 5th, presented by State Bank of Southern Utah. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games.
We're joined now by Cole Bagley, Utah Mammoth insider for KSL Sports. Cole, good morning.
Good morning, guys. How we doing?
Doing well. The debate this morning, do you believe the Mammoth can force a Game 7? And basically, with the exception of Game 3, these games have basically been coin flips. So I'm figuring, sure, they could. Will they? I have no idea. Do you see this as a coin flip, or have you seen something now that makes you think one team might have a distinctive edge in Game 6?
No, I think this is a really close series. The fact that most of these games have been decided by just a goal, and Utah has led quite a bit in this series, especially in the third period. I do think that Utah has what it takes to force a Game 7. If you look at just the shots on goal, the face-off percentage, the hits, everything has been just pretty even. And like you said, it's come down to a coin flip a couple of times. And unfortunately, I think, some of that luck, if you will, has been more on the side of Vegas, although I do think it's more experience, right? Vegas has been to the playoffs 8 out of 9 seasons. They've won a Stanley Cup within the last few years. And you can kind of see that experience coming through in those moments where they need a big goal or they need, a big save or a big stop or whatever it is. They've been able to get those while Utah just hasn't quite been able to, to close some of these games out. But, after, kind of a longer answer, I do think that Utah has the ability to force a Game 7, but like I'm just not sure if they'll get it done or not.
How about the power play? Can that be fixed?
That's a good question. Yes and no. I think we're seeing some of the same struggles that Utah had for a majority of the regular season, kind of come back to the forefront in this series. And, when Utah is playing well in terms of their power play, they're asserting themselves physically. They're getting pucks to the middle of the ice. They're putting pucks on net. And that just hasn't happened. They've gone far too perimeter. They've gone far too predictable. They've started to settle again for just playing the puck between Keller, Sergachev, and Gunther, and both Keller and Gunther taking one-timers. That's just too predictable. Carter Hart has been ready for that, 99% of the time. And, it's just in the playoffs, the game is the same, but it also changes because so many goals are greasy. They're not as calculated. They're not as, well strung together. And Utah just has not asserted themselves in a way that has made them successful. And so, is it fixable? Yeah, I think it is, but I just don't know that Utah, has that confidence or is as willing to do the things in order to make the power play successful.
Cole Bagley joining us here talking about the Mammoth Game 6 with Vegas. We've had people saying it looks like Vegas is more willing to try to carry the puck or pass the puck into that attacking zone, whereas the Mammoth look like they just want to dump it in the corner and then try to go and win it back. And that is bugging people. Now, the total number of goals scored in this series seems pretty high to me, and it seems like both strategies are working pretty well. First off, do you see that? And second off, do you think there's a reason for it? It's frustrating some people. I think what really frustrates people is the overtime goals because this thing could be over right now. But nonetheless, address that point because we're hearing that from people on social media.
Yeah, what I've seen from Utah in this series is, they're outmatched in terms of physicality. Vegas is playing their game and their style in the defensive zone where they're very good at denying possession. They're very good at puck retrievals and breaking out and, playing the body to, force forwards off of the puck and, quickly generate turnovers and go the other direction. And unfortunately, that's how Utah, was at their best. And I think we've talked about this before. Utah is generally at their best offensively when they're able to get pucks in deep, win those battles in behind the net, recirculate the puck, and then break teams down with their speed. Vegas has denied that every single game because they simply just bullied Utah off the puck. And so what that's forced Utah to do is to primarily rely on their speed, which, is there, which is, another strong part of their game. But so many of their goals have had to come off of the rush. And when you're generating off the rush, that means that you're, creating turnovers in your own zone, which I think at times has been difficult. Vegas is at the other end. They're also a very good team in terms of possession. And that's how they've scored a lot of their goals is, they've won those battles at the other end. They're getting pucks in deep. They're winning. They're retrieving. They're circulating the puck back to their defensemen. They're getting it to the forwards. They're getting it down low, and then they're winning battles in front of the net to create dangerous scoring chances and score greasy goals. And so for Utah, I think when we talked to head coach Andre Tourny the other day, he said there's not really any more surprises in this series. When you get 5-6 games deep, what to expect from the other team. And kind of, the way that the series has gone is the way that they, kind of expect it to go moving forward. And so, it's this battle of can Utah thrive and win hockey games simply by generating off the rush because that possession just hasn't been there. And, as we've seen, Vegas, and like I said before, that experience I think has been kind of the X factor for Vegas because it has been a pretty even series, but when Vegas has needed a big goal, they've been able to go to work to, thrive in terms of what their offensive approach is and score goals at time, in big moments and help them get wins. So, for Utah, they have to just continue to utilize their speed and I think hope that, enough opportunities present themselves and, bury those chances.
Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's room of choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Hey, I'm Josh Spiegel, host of the podcast Lunatic in the Newsroom. If you enjoy journalism that drifts into mild panic, wild overthinking, and a guaranteed nervous breakdown, Lunatic in the Newsroom is for you. It's news like you've never heard before. The only newsroom with a panic button. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and gasp in horror as the show spirals completely out of control. It's not just news, it's emotionally unstable. Lunatic in the Newsroom. Listen today.
And we keep hearing about the experience issue as far as on the ice. But I'm wondering what you think as far as the perspective of the management and the executives, as they've been able to watch this, to figure out what they need to do to make the team better.
In terms of like right away or long term?
Not necessarily immediately, but across the board as they go about this, because everybody understands that this is an expectation of this is the first of several postseason appearances that will be consecutive. So maybe they can see things, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that to make the team better in the succeeding years when it gets to the postseason.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is Utah needs to add size, and I think that's pretty obvious. And I think that management is already considering that. If you look at the prospect pool, there's a whole forest of trees that's coming up in this prospect pool. I mean, most of these young guys that they have down in the juniors and the AHL and what have you, they're big boys, they're big players, and I think where that's played such a critical role in this series is, yes, the hits have been pretty even, but it just feels like Vegas has been more impactful with their physicality. For Utah, it feels like they're just kind of finishing checks that don't really matter, whereas, Vegas is bumping guys off the puck. They're denying zone entries with their physicality. They're winning back pucks and breaking out and then going the other direction. They're able to assert themselves in the offensive zone, by winning battles and pushing defensemen out of high danger areas so that they can then generate dangerous scoring chances. So for Utah, I think it's become pretty obvious that Utah has the speed, they have the finesse, they have the skill. But where they've lacked in this series, and I think what's determined the outcome of some of these games has just been Vegas's ability to just kind of bully Utah in a lot of different ways. And if you look at the teams who have won Stanley Cups over the last few years, it's been a huge combination of speed, finesse, but then physicality. I mean, the Florida Panthers, have set that standard where it is a bully-style game that is winning Stanley Cups. It wasn't the Edmonton Oilers who thrived in terms of speed. I mean, they have two of the fastest players in the game, but, Florida was able to bully them and win 2 Stanley Cups. So for Utah, hopefully obviously, like I said, management has a plan. They see that there's a need for size, but hopefully, in addition to prospects, I think you have to look at, free agents and possible trades, coming up this summer because, this is the standard now. You have to get to the playoffs and you have to continue to make progress in the playoffs. And what I see right now is a team that, is good and is learning things and is making progress. But, if you just keep this same kind of a roster and same kind of approach, you're not going to make it out of the first round. And if you somehow get to the second, I think that's, kind of where you're going to reach,
plateau.
Your potential. Yeah, you're going to plateau. So I think that size is the biggest thing that Utah needs to add. And we'll see, as we move forward into the summer and into future years, how are they able to do that successfully?
They went from 89 points and missing the playoffs last year to 92 and making the playoffs. But the league's kind of lopsided. There's more good teams in the East, and 95 points didn't make the playoffs in the East this year. And so when I think about, okay, don't plateau, get deeper, I mean, they have to get a lot better. Just in their division, Minnesota was 12 points in front of them. Dallas was 20 points in front of them. Colorado, I can't even do the math, 29 points in front of them. So it seems like it's not just how do you close the gap on Vegas. Vegas only finished 3 points in front of them, and now we're seeing how this playoff series plays out. But these other 3 teams look like they're way in front. Maybe they'll come back a little bit, but it seems like there's a lot of work to be done, and a 3-point improvement isn't a good enough pace if they're going to catch these teams and compete with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pace that you need to be on is 5 to 7 point improvement year over year moving forward. And, I think the Central is just kind of a tough division to gauge. I mean, that was easily the best division in the National Hockey League. It's 3 of the best teams in the entire league. I mean, Colorado, it was just they were setting records all year. I mean, it was one of the best individual seasons for a franchise in the history of the league. And then you had Minnesota go out and add a guy like Quinn Hughes to a very talented roster that is stepping into their championship window. I mean, they had a handful of players who, helped the United States win gold and Boldy and Faber and what have you. And then, of course, Quinn Hughes and they've got Kaprizov. So it's just like, Minnesota is just right behind Colorado. That is going to be an amazing second-round series. I think, whoever comes out of that series is who I'd expect to win the conference. And I think if Colorado is able to come out, I think that they'll eventually win the Stanley Cup. So, for Utah, it's, continue to get better every year. They've got an opportunity to do so. We'll see kind of how they play it out. I mean, there's a handful of contracts that are coming off the books this year that are going to open up some roster spots, both in terms of, forwards and defensemen. But, for Utah, it's a balancing act because they have this really deep prospect pool, but how do you go about that in terms of a strategy? Because you don't want to take steps back. You don't want to open up roster spots and bring in young kids and then, all of a sudden next year you're missing the playoffs because, you prioritize, adding youth as opposed to adding the right players or, veteran players or going out and, adding guys in free agency. So, I think right now is probably the toughest stage of the rebuild for Bill Armstrong because, he's hit on some draft picks, the Logan Cooley's, the Dylan Gunthers. He's got some veterans that are coming into their prime like Nick Schmaltz and Clayton Keller, and then he's got a deep prospect pool. Plus, he has a whole bunch of money to spend and an opportunity to acquire free agents. So it's about, creating the right recipe, to not only continue to make progress, but to set this team up to step into a championship window here in a couple of years.
Cole, we appreciate the time. Enjoyed Game 6 tonight, and we'll see if we get a Game 7 Sunday.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. There's Cole Bagley.
Now at McDonald's, a McDouble is $2.50, so you can get your gym gains on, or just get lunch for only $2.50. Get more value on the under $3 menu.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hey, I'm Josh Spiegel, host of the podcast Lunatic in the Newsroom. If you enjoy journalism that drifts into mild panic, wild overthinking, and a guaranteed nervous breakdown, Lunatic in the Newsroom is for you. It's news like you've never heard before. The only newsroom with a panic button. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and gasp in horror as the show spirals completely out of control. It's not just news, it's emotionally unstable. Lunatic in the Newsroom. Listen today.